Hello and welcome to this special video edition of the Two Time Labs podcast. And today we're going to be going over the digital storage decision tool. So you may have already listened to the podcast in which we took you through the steps. That's my compatriot Ray and I. And in this video, we're going to be going over the actual tool itself to give you a sort of short orientation to it. So Ray Sidney-Smith,
Hey
thanks
there.
for being on the call.
Happy to be here, Francis.
Great. It's good to be back to finally go over the final output of what took many months of hard work. But anyway, let's jump right in. So the tool starts with just an informational page and explains some of the background, why we put it together, and what we're hoping to accomplish. Essentially, it's a tool for small and medium-sized business people or professionals who want to put together all of the tips and tricks and advice that exists around the internet with respect to storing your digital information or small items. So we wanted to put this all in one place and to solve sort of the problem of deciding, do I use the cloud for this? Do I use a hard drive for that? Do I use a CD for this? And give an interactive experience. So not just write a single blog post, but give you an opportunity to enter information, get some feedback, and get a report at the end. Is that sort of an accurate way of saying it, Ray?
Absolutely. Yeah, we talked about a lot of things in the podcast episodes, and this is the culmination of the tool surrounding that content. So it gives you some sense of action based on that conversation that we had.
Well said. All right. So it's a clickable tool, as you can see, and the clickable bits are usually in blue. So we're going to click on your agenda. And here it offers essentially the four types of data that we are going to be dealing with. The first is what I call legacy items. The second is immediate information. The third is data you created more than a few moments ago, but you want to save for the future. And the fourth is archive data, which is stuff you want to keep forever. So hopefully you get to this point and you accept the mission. Click there. And the first type of data that you're going to be looking at has to do with legacy data. But before that, we actually define what's called the law of catastrophic loss. And we started by saying, what if you lose everything in a fire or in a flood or in a hurricane or typhoon, whatever it might be? What are the things that you're most likely to want to keep? And we take this frame of mind and say, how could you recover from even the worst of disasters? So hold that thought in mind because we're going to go through the four types and look at how do we preserve our peace of mind even when we drive up to our house and it looks something like the picture in this photograph where the water is halfway up to the first floor and everything that you possess is probably of any value is gone. So how do you protect against that? So the first type that we look at is legacy information. Ray, you want to just explain what that is real quick?
Yeah, so legacy information are those things that you want to pass on to future generations, if you want to keep it in that perspective. It's all those things that are of high emotional value to you and you want to be able to pass them on. It may not be to your children, but it may be to people that are far in the future who find value in what you had to leave behind. And so that's something that needs to be resilient in its process for keeping it safe, because at the end of the day, some archaeologist and some anthropologist is going to be very interested in what you were all about today in the very distant future. So even if it's not about leaving it to family, it is really for the ability for future generations to see what you were all about today.
Right. Like someone who wants to come and do a family tree based on your information, and hopefully you have it all organized. So this would actually prepare you to put together something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we touch on three phases for this type one. We go through all the different legacy items or keepsakes you could use. We actually ask you to enter your own list. Then we describe the process, the magic of layering up. And then we look at the process for managing keepsakes in the future. So the first, maybe the most important keepsake that we have is our photographs. They're especially the ones that are old, ones that are impossible to replace. They may only be one copy of each of them. And here we ask you to actually make a list of all the keepsake photographs you can think of. So in a way, this is a capture step. You're entering, for example, pictures of grandparents, great grandparents. And I'll just be typing real fast, not trying to fix.
Yeah, and I think here, people can list photo albums or where certain family members may be in possession of photographs you want to have access to. And so, I think it's really, really helpful to be able to capture not just each individual photograph, although some are very important and you want those, like a headshot of a great-great-grandparent or something like that, but also photo albums that might be in specific locations.
Right. I actually sat down with my mom's photo albums a few years ago and took pictures until my fingers were hurting.
Yeah.
But it was I wasn't thinking in these terms. Unfortunately, I wasn't that smart at the time. I just wanted to be able to share them. But now looking back, they are very, very valuable. So here the program returns a list of photographs you just entered. And it asks you, do you want to continue adding photographs, or do you want to move on to another set of legacy items? So let's move on to the next set, which are non-legal documents. So non-legal doesn't mean illegal. It's just that these have a sentimental value. Your first driver's license, you don't want to give away or throw away. Your mother's passport or love letter that started you on your journey. These are based mostly on paper, probably. And you don't want to get rid of them because they have sentimental value. So, for example, I found some love letters in mine when I did this exercise.
You romantic you.
I found all my old passports. Actually held on to those. Took pictures and held on to them. I'm kind of afraid of throwing them away because someone might try to assume my identity. That's crazy, I know. But so your program returns your list of non-legal documents in red. You can go ahead and add some more if you want. You can keep on adding and adding and adding. But let's move on to legal documents. So these have legal or financial value, like a loan agreement, a birth certificate. These aren't so exciting. Self-explanatory. And again, program returns the list. And finally, for the last step, we do a sweep and we say, okay, now we really want to think about legacy items, not just the ones that are photographs or the ones that you could think of first. What about other things, other objects? What about things that you only have an emotional sort of piece of value? They're not a photograph. It could be a curio. I have a little picture here of maybe I should share that. That's a Rafiki, who's in that Lion King. And the reason I keep that there, and I actually have a picture on the wall back here, is because it reminds me of a great coach that I had. So I wouldn't give away my Rafiki objects just because it reminds me of what she did. And I actually share some of the ways in which I personally have benefited from my father taking care of these items, and also my school, which didn't. So as you think of other things, you could think of my Rafiki picture and figurine. Anything else you could think of? Okay. And then there's another phase. And this is where things get sort of interesting. Here we talk about layering up. So it's not just good enough to enumerate all of the different items. What Ray came up with is, but he shared the idea of what I call layering up. So Ray, you want to give us a quick summary of what the technique is all about?
Right. So this is about, if you want to call it, transmogrifying the value of something that is legacy into something that is now a digital artifact. And so in this case, you're showing a photograph of your childhood primary school shirt where people signed it, and there's this very high value to it. And in reality, if it's just stuck in a chest of drawers in your attic or in a basement or something like that, all that can happen to it is that it can degrade and eventually decay. And so why not turn it into a digital artifact that you can then share and enjoy and experience with others? I use the example of giving artifacts that were of my grandmother's possession and recording her, telling her history of emigrating from her home country and coming to the United States, and what those articles and artifacts meant to her. And that then became the thing I wanted to keep. The digital artifact was now much more important to me than the physical artifact, and that meant I could give that away to family members. I could discard it completely, and it no longer held the value of the physical thing, because now the digital thing was far more impressive.
Right. So it can ultimately replace the physical thing.
You bet.
So that you could actually feel good or okay about throwing away the digital thing.
The physical thing. Yep.
The physical thing. So I tested this myself. So I haven't thrown away this particular item, but I threw away a whole bunch of others. And sure enough, it does work. I actually used videos. So.
And this was to share with your classmates in
Right.
this case. Yeah.
Right. And you know, it worked. I shared it with them first, but then I made my own copy.
Right.
Sort of, again, thinking of future generations who might benefit from it. So this actually has deep psychological roots. And I found an article and I found some references that actually support the process of layering up. And we encourage you to create a plan to, what are you going to do in the future around legacy items that you acquire? So one plan could be for future ones that you acquire, keep them at a minimum. That's my plan. To digitize them is to use my smartphone because it's handy, or I could use my tablet. I have a camera, but I wouldn't use that. In terms of donation, I would look for people in need who could benefit from having them. And for discarding, I would look for full detachment. So when I feel completely detached from the item, then I feel good enough, or strongly enough, or brave enough is probably a good word, to be able to discard the item. Okay, so that's the 4 steps. Okay, so here's the full legacy plan. I put 4 steps together, and that brings us to the end of type 1, legacy items. Ready for type 2?
You got it. Let's do it.
Okay, so type 2 is what happens when you're entering information and your system crashes. So this happened to me in an office in Caracas, Venezuela, typing away on a project, and all of a sudden the roof started to leak and water dripped into my keyboard, and ugly things happened after that. That was the end of that. And I lost, of course, what I was typing on. I had no way to capture it. So how can you, in the middle of entering information, ensure that it's being saved? So if you're using the latest technology, you'd know that there's a gap sometimes between entering information and it being saved to somewhere safe, like the cloud. And from our point of view today in 2019, the cloud is probably the safest place to store information. Would you agree, Ray?
I think certainly the cloud it's got most of the features that we want in backup. That it probably is the strongest avenue for most people.
And you can back up the cloud with another cloud to cloud backup, in case you don't trust your cloud provider for whatever reason it might be. We had a long conversation about that. We talked about, we did the recording.
Yep, and you can secure those items in the cloud. So even if someone like your cloud provider gains access to that data, they don't really gain access to that data. So you have a lot of backup opportunities.
Right. Options are available to us today. So the safest way, of course, is to actually create in the cloud, but that's not always possible. So we actually start by asking you to list all the places where you create information. So what media do you use? So I use digital, written, spoken, sound. I don't use audio. I'm not a painter or anything. I don't do much with my hands, actually. I'm not very artistic that way. But these are the 4 video. Right, these are the 5 that I use. And what devices do I use? I use my laptop. I don't have a desktop. And I don't use my tablet much. Maybe my smartphone to do the odd video. And where? I have a home office, so I do all my creating in my home office. Okay, so let's say that's a complete list. I don't want to enter anymore. Here's my setup. So at the very end, we'll actually print out all of these outputs as we've been entering them. Everything in red gets accumulated at the end. But in case there's a disruption, we ask you to copy and paste it somewhere safe, just in case, again, your immediate information gets disrupted and you're not able to do that. So the next tool is to use a keystroke logger. So these have a bit of an infamous background because they're used by hackers to track your keystrokes. But there are positive ways to use a keystroke logger, as I learned from Ray in the podcast, which is to run them in the background. And as you're typing, it just keeps track of all of your keystrokes. And that's it. I've tested it. It works really, really well. Thankfully, I haven't had to use it, but they do work really well. And as we go along, they'll get better.
Yeah, and this is for someone who really feels the need to have critical backup of every keystroke that they make on their system.
Right. Really interesting. So autosave, if you're not using the cloud, which does autosaves virtually automatically, but you're using a program on your laptop, you want to go into the settings, and here we actually prompt you to enter your creative software. So I use Audible for audio. Can't remember the name of the video creator I use, but I use something. I remember the name of it.
I think you mean Audacity.
Oh, I said Audible. Oh, sorry.
We listen to audiobooks on Audible.
Wrong odd. On OBS Studios, I create interviews and store some of them. So those are those 3 of the ones I use. I use Paint.net. Paint.net. So once again, it saves my list. I don't have anything else to add. It saves my list. Non-cloud software. So how can I reduce the risk? So here we have a quick discussion about different ways to reduce the risk between entering your information and it being saved somewhere in the cloud. And again, the choices are up to you. We recommend that if, for example, you aren't creating in a digital format to begin with, like, for example, Twyla Tharp, she's a famous choreographer. At the end of every evening or for every session that she does, she uses videotape because you can't, as far as I know, there's no way to reproduce a dance that you created one day on the next day. So the way she does it is by using videotape. And she actually would go through and summarize everything that happened in that session as they were creating a dance. So that when she comes the following morning, she can pick up where she left off. So if you're not creating in a digital format, there are ways to still capture immediate information that are very creative. Okay, ready for the third type, Ray?
I am.
Okay, third type. Short-term data. So here's not immediate. So this is not stuff you're creating in the moment, but it's the stuff you just finished creating 5 minutes ago. Once again, having the cloud is a big blessing. But I broke down the 2 options that you have between smartphones and tablets, which are portable, and laptops and desktops, which are sort of less portable and have more functionality. Once again, we'll go over the catastrophes that can happen and revisit the idea of we introduced at the very beginning of living in a world that's not protected. I remember a time, and there are some people who still say, if I lose my phone, I lose my whole life. So they have no protection. But we actually dig into the 3 kinds of protection you can have for your phone and then ask you to create a plan. So,
and while you're doing that, I will make note that a lot of people think that their telecom provider is providing backups of things, and that is not always the case. So remember that even if you have an iPhone or an Android device and you think, oh, well, that's all being backed up in some way, shape, or form by them, do not think that. There's all kinds of data that might be resident on the phone that is not being backed up by your telecom provider. And to some great extent, I think that from a security and data privacy perspective, I don't want my telecom provider having access to all the data on my phone anyway. So be conscious and conscientious about the backup that you do. Again, as you said, Francis, the ability to cloud backup your phones is now readily available and in a secure way that is not associated with your telecom provider. And I would suggest that you do it.
Right. I think that's the third choice we're about to get to. But the second choice is the SD card. What do you have on your card that you want to have permanently backed up? I keep some emergency documents like a picture of my passport, driver's license, insurance, registration, car stuff, that if I ever get pulled over by the cops, I can very quickly just whip it out. And then for the cloud, I use Google Backup. I'm sure there are others. I know Apple doesn't Apple
iCloud
allow you to? Yeah.
Yep. It used to only be able to back up locally to the iTunes, but iTunes software. But now you can back up your phone to iCloud.
Great. So those are the ones I use. So I'm done. So there we go. And then for laptops and desktops, you introduced me to this idea of mean time between failure, which I've really taken to heart. Which, in other words, is saying we call it here an internal failure. There's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time before your hard drive dies, the way mine did last January of 2018. The panic. I fortunately didn't lose too much, but you do want to put in place a system that can, for example, having a local backup. I use an external hard drive that backs my hard drive up every week at this point, in addition to my cloud backup. But here we make a number of distinctions that could help you to make that make a good plan. Here we're really focused on you're creating plans that will allow you to use going forward, that could give you the total peace of mind that we're talking for, even if an internal catastrophe happens.
Right, and I usually use the mean time before failure as an analogy to the average life expectancy. You're expected to live only so long by averages, and you could certainly exceed those averages. But for your technology, you don't really want to be not backed up and not prepared for its mean time before failure. The average time or the average life expectancy of all of your tools, whether that be a shovel in your backyard or your smartphone, they're all going to die at some point.
Or your hard drive.
Or your hard drive, in your case, yeah.
Yeah, I've taken that to heart. I used to leave my laptop on overnight to do backups. No, I said, you know what? That's just doubling or halving my mean time between failure. So after you explain that, I changed my practice completely.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of those things where I think a lot of people misunderstand that when a hard drive is running, it's running, and it doesn't take a break in the way that you think it does. And there may be energy modes where you think that it's not moving, but that doesn't mean that even in a solid state drive environment, if there are any bits moving, there's heat running over those transistors, which means that there is decay. And so everybody needs to take to heart that, all technology when in use is degrading. And that means there's a failure imminent over time.
It's breaking as we speak.
You got it.
Right. So here we ask you to think about the ways you can create backups as jobs and assigning different jobs to different kinds of technologies. And here we actually invite you to take a few steps to first create a list of all the business data, and then the personal data that you want to back up from your laptop or desktop. And then we ask you to list all the resources that are available to you, that you're something you'll be spending money on. But we ask you to create a matrix. So here I actually created all the ones, oh, something just fell. All the ones I just created, all the ones I actually have, it's already listed there. But I think there's a couple, yep, there's a couple that I added while I was putting together this list. One was OneDrive, and I actually got an iCloud account that does some backups. So you'd add those to your list. But the key output of this particular section, this type, is this matrix. And here's what it looks like. So there's a list of all of the resources you want to back up on the left. It's just a spreadsheet. And a list of all of the resources on the top. So here are the files, and here are the resources you want to give. You want to give these jobs to. So, for example, for me, pCloud has the job of syncing my work products, some of which I create and some of which actually earn money. So they have a dollar significance. So it has a job of syncing to its cloud. iDrive doesn't sync. iDrive just does a full backup of all of my data. So you can see it just does a complete sort of blind backup. It's not trying to sync in real time. It operates mostly when my computer is not being used. But here I've assigned different jobs to all the different resources I have available to me. And we invite you to do the same. So we provide you with a spreadsheet on Google Sheets in which you can do the same. Create this kind of complete and overlapping system for giving yourself peace of mind.
And I would just make the one note to folks to make sure that you're not accidentally doing a recursive level of backup so that it infinitely loops the backup on top of backup on top of backup and fills the storage space of your storage capacity. So just be wary of or just be mindful of that can happen if you back up 3 services in a row to each other. Then they could potentially just keep backing up infinitely until they just fill their data, and then they'll stop backing up, which is the worst part, which is that you'll think it's backing up in the background, but it just hit its limit, and now you're not getting anything backed up.
Right. And
I've seen it happen. So
that's something that happened to me. I thought my cloud backup was working, and turned out it wasn't quite working the way I thought. So it was skipping some files, and the provider didn't even know that they were being skipped. So this was news to them. And
yeah, that's the other side, is you cannot depend upon others to determine. You have to, I think you need to spot check your own backups over time. So you go back and you select random files, extract them from the backup, and make sure that they actually open and work. And that's the case for me with database files. So I back up. In my case, I have a fairly important Evernote database because it runs so much of my life. And so I actually like to restore that database on occasion from the backup to see, hey, would I, if I opened up a particular note, an ENEX file from this Evernote backup, is it going to actually open? Am I going to actually be able to import it? And thankfully, over the years, they always have. But that's because I've been testing. You better believe the moment I didn't and something broke, it wouldn't. There's a law for that chaos will ensue if you don't check
Murphy.
The chaos. Exactly.
Murphy's his name.
Yeah, I don't know if it's Murphy's law or whether it's some kind of other law where if you don't make sure that it doesn't break, then it will certainly break when
you're not looking. It'll start. It's a gremlin law.
Exactly. There you go. The gremlin law. That's the new
one. So the fourth and the final kind of data is stuff that's you don't want on your hard drive because it takes up space, but you want somewhere permanent. So permanent nowadays does not mean on a DVD or a CD because those deteriorate. Anything electromechanical cannot be seen as permanent. It's not an external hard drive necessarily. But here it's stuff that you want to keep forever, but you don't want to keep around. You're okay keeping it somewhere, just as long as you can get to it. So my father has, for example, I have a file of all my father's school reports. Just fun to go look back to, what you got for Latin. No purpose out of that. Well, we actually have the paper, but to take the picture of the paper, and then that could be stored somewhere permanent. So my father's school reports. So let's not add any more to this list. I think now we're almost ready to go to the wrap up. We've already done all the lists, all the types. There's nothing showing here. Okay, so let's see if this is our final display page. So it has, and I was entering stuff very quickly without really thinking about it, but here's all of the outputs that it produced, all saved in one place, all the way down to the school reports. So there's no way that we've built in to print this page. You, once again, would have to do a copy and paste. But the idea is that you're walking away with something looking like a plan for what to do with respect to these 4 types of data. All your inputs have been preserved. It's really easy to go back in and match them up to the questions, but all your brainstorming has been preserved in one place. And that's the tool. Ray.
Yes.
What do you think?
I think this is great. And I think that, since you're looking in the web browser, you could probably browse directly you can print directly from the web browser if it gives you the capability. And so that's one way you can do it, just to control print maybe.
I think I'm in a window of its own because I'm in the development environment.
Yeah. But I think that for you, the user, when you're in the browser window, you should be able to print this. But I think what Francis said is right. Go ahead and copy and paste this into a document, and then you can edit it into the requisite actions necessary to make this happen. I mean, all plans are wonderful until they're not done. And so the goal here is that you take this opportunity that Francis has afforded you by bringing this stuff to your attention and identifying the actions you can take. And, all the best intentions in the world will do nothing if you don't actually back this stuff up. So good luck.
All right. And on that note, so we give a last page of congratulations. And Ray, I want to thank you for all the work that you provided, because really I'm the ignorant one. I was just picking your brain. People tune into the podcast, they'll see that that guy Francis doesn't really know much. He's just asking a whole bunch of questions. Ray's really the expert here, and thanks for coming on the show to share your expertise and helping put together this tool.
Absolutely, you're more than welcome, and I hope everybody gets some benefit out of the storage decision tool.
Me too, and this is really a proof of concept in the sense that it's not a final product or something that could be shipped, but it's something that someone could build on and someone could provide in the future. All they would have to do is update the thinking, because as new technology comes out, there's going to be some AI application that not randomly, but goes through and all of your files on your hard drive, and then this figures out how to save them. And it does that analytic page where it decides what to store, where it'll do all of that for you automatically. But that's way off in the future. But this is sort of the beginning of getting to something like that. So thanks again, Ray.
You're more than welcome.
Thanks for listening, guys, and all the best to you.